I've always believed that if you want to see who someone really is, you don't watch them when they're struggling. You wait until they think they've won. That's the moment the mask slips. That's when they feel untouchable. And that's exactly when the truth comes out. The rooftop of the Meridian was glowing that evening, dressed in soft golden light, and the scent of expensive lilac drifting through the air. Conversations floated around us, light, proud, self-congratulatory, the kind of noise that only exists in rooms full of people who believe they've made it. We were there for one reason: to celebrate my daughter Madison's graduation with Ivy League honors. A moment that should have been filled with pride, with warmth, with something real. Jeffrey stood at the head of the table, holding his crystal flute just right, letting the sunset reflect through it like a man posing for a photograph. He looked perfect, successful, in control. The same man I had spent 30 years supporting. Building, steadying from the background, then he cleared his throat. The room quieted instantly. I've decided to start a new life without you. He didn't lower his voice, he didn't take me aside, he said it openly right there, in front of everyone. In front of our daughter. In front of people who had watched our lives unfold for decades. Across the table, Tiffany, young, polished, and far too comfortable, didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She just let a small smile sit on her lips as her fingers traced the edge of her glass. The silence that followed was heavy. Waiting. Expecting. They wanted a reaction. They were waiting for me to break. To cry. To shout. To give them a scene so Jeffrey could stand there and look like the calm, reasonable one while I became the emotional wreck. But that moment never came. Instead, I felt the cool condensation of my glass against my hand. Grounded, still, present. And I smiled. Congratulations on your honesty, Jeffrey, I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was calm, precise, final. Before standing, I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I placed it gently on the table beside his untouched steak, aligning it neatly with the edge of his plate. Something for you to review later, I added. No drama. No hesitation. I didn't wait for his reply. I didn't look back. I turned and walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking softly against the floor, echoing through the silence he had created. He thought he had just made an announcement, but he didn't realize he had just signed his own professional death warrant. The elevator ride down felt strange, like stepping out of one world and into another. Up there, the air had felt thin, almost suffocating, filled with ego and performance. Down here on the street, the night air was cooler, clearer. I stepped outside and paused. The city lights reflected against my shoes. As I stood still for a moment, not to think, not to process, but to act, I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. This wasn't grief. This was execution. I opened our shared banking app, the one Jeffrey assumed I barely understood. The one he thought I used only for small things like bills and groceries. What he didn't know was that for the past 6 months, I had been tracking everything. Every account, every transfer, every hidden move he thought was clever. He believed he was building a new life quietly. He didn't realize I had already mapped it out weeks ago. Carefully. Completely. I sent a single message to my investigator. He went public. Initiate the lockdown. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. A notification. Jeffrey had tried to pay the bill upstairs. Declined $7,200. I could almost picture it, the confusion on his face, the shift in his voice, the way he would try again, then again. Each attempt more urgent than the last. Card after card, failure after failure. For 30 years, I had kept everything running. It took me seconds to stop. Mom. I turned. Madison stood at the entrance, her gown draped over her arm. Her eyes weren't filled with tears. They were sharp, focused. She didn't come looking for comfort. She came looking for answers. He's still up there, she said quietly, arguing with the manager. Then, after a pause, he told everyone Tiffany is moving into the penthouse. Our penthouse? I stepped closer and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. He can say whatever he wants, I told her. It doesn't make it true. She nodded slowly, understanding more than most people her age ever should. Come on, I said softly. We're going to your Aunt Diana's. What about the house? She asked. Your things? The locks are already being changed, I replied calmly. And that penthouse he's so proud of? It's under an LLC he hasn't looked at properly in years. I gave a small, knowing smile. He thinks he owns everything. But he forgot who actually holds the deed. As we drove away, I saw him standing outside Tiffany just behind him. He was on the phone, frustrated, loud, trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. For the first time in decades. He didn't look powerful. He looked small. There's a kind of loneliness that comes with always being the reliable one. For 30 years, I wasn't just his wife. I was the one who held everything together behind the scenes. The one who stepped in when things went wrong. The one who carried the weight without being seen. I remembered the financial crash years ago. How close everything came to collapsing. How I took my inheritance, money meant for my own security, and used it to save his company. I didn't ask for anything in return, just respect. Just partnership. But he never wanted a partner. He wanted support without accountability. Later that night, sitting in the quiet of Diana's guest room, I opened my laptop. The screen lit up the darkness as I accessed a file he didn't even know existed. Project Clarity. 6 months ago. I noticed a small inconsistency. $12.000 to most people. It meant nothing. To me, it was a signal. I followed it. And what I found was everything: hidden accounts, offshore transfers, a steady flow of money being redirected into a company tied directly to Tiffany. $1.8 million. That was the cost of his new life. Money taken. Slowly. Quietly. From everything we built together. He hadn't earned it. He had taken it. From savings. From investments. From our daughter's future. From me. I stared at the numbers. Calm washing over me like something inevitable, because in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was factual. Measured. Final. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his auditor. And the audit was no longer private. 2 days later, I pulled into the house, the place I had built. Piece by piece, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like something else entirely. Jeffrey's SUV was parked carelessly on the lawn, a small detail, but it said everything. I walked up to the door and reached for my keys. New. Lock. Cheap. Temporary. I didn't knock. I didn't react. I simply opened my phone, accessed the system, and used the override he didn't know existed. The door unlocked quietly. Inside. The air smelled unfamiliar. Floral. Too strong. Too new. Tiffany stood in the living room, holding a roll of bright stickers, placing one on my furniture like she already belonged there. You're not supposed to be here, she said, her voice less confident now. I live here, I replied. Calm. Flat. You don't. Jeffrey appeared from the kitchen, trying to stand tall, trying to look in control. This is over, he said. The house is part of the business. I'm the CEO. I didn't let him finish. You're the CEO of a company currently under financial review, I said evenly, and if you had read the documents properly, you'd know this house is in a trust under Madison's name. I paused, with me as trustee. His expression changed instantly. The realization hit hard. You can't do this, he said, his voice cracking. I have nowhere else to go. I stepped forward, peeling the sticker off the desk with slow precision. They are, I said, my voice steady and final. I crumpled it into a ball and dropped it into the trash. And until that review is complete, you are a guest in my daughter's house. A guest who has exactly 30 minutes to pack a suitcase and leave, before the police arrive to escort a trespasser off the premises. Tiffany looked at Jeffrey, expecting him to fight. But Jeffrey just stared at me, seeing for the first time the woman I actually was, not the glorified bookkeeper he'd ignored for decades, but a forensic predator who had finally found her prey. I watched them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a doomed species. They weren't fighting for love. They were fighting for furniture. And I had already won the house. They say that anger is a fire, but in my profession, anger is an ice bath. It's what you use to preserve the evidence. As I sat in the war room of Diana's guest house, a space now filled with 3 monitors, a high-speed scanner, and 2 decades worth of tax returns, I felt a familiar chilling precision settle over me. Jeffrey had spent years treating our business as a magic trick, moving money from one pocket to another, hoping the audience wouldn't notice the sleight of hand. But he'd forgotten that I was the one who designed the stage. I picked up the phone and dialed the direct line for the regional vice president of our primary lender. Arthur, it's Valerie. I'm calling to trigger the emergency freeze on all accounts associated with the Caldwell Group. Yes, including the secondary payroll. I've just uploaded the affidavit of suspected embezzlement to the portal. Arthur's voice was hesitant. Valerie Jeffrey is the primary signatory on those lines, and I am the majority shareholder of the holding company that secures them. Arthur, read the bylaws I drafted in 2012. If the lead auditor flags a discrepancy exceeding 5% of quarterly revenue, the freeze is mandatory. Check your inbox. The discrepancy is currently sitting at 22%. I hung up. No emotion, no regret. This brings me to a concept most people misunderstand about conflict. It's the predator's silence. Jeffrey thought my quietness over the last few months was submission. He thought that because I didn't scream when I found Tiffany's earring in his car, or because I didn't confront him when he lost $50,000 in a bad investment, that I was weak. But silence isn't always a sign of defeat. Sometimes it's a strategic choice. In the world of forensic auditing, you don't strike when you see the crime. You strike when you have enough evidence to make the conviction inevitable. I didn't want to fight. I wanted an autopsy. Every day I stayed silent. Was another day I spent tightening the noose, ensuring that when the lockdown happened, there wouldn't be a single loophole for him to crawl through. By noon, the professional fallout was in full swing. My legal team had served the temporary restraining order. Jeffrey's company email was deactivated. His corporate car, a vehicle paid for by a business loan I had personally guaranteed, was flagged for repossession. I watched the clock. At exactly 12:45, my phone began to vibrate. It was Jeffrey. Then a text from Tiffany. Then another from Jeffrey. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear his voice to know what it sounded like when a man realizes the ground he's standing on has been sold out from under him. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The audit had to be perfect to be lethal. And looking at the red lines populating my screen, I knew I hadn't missed a single cent. The investigation into a financial crime often starts with a grand discovery, but it ends with a single devastating detail. For me, that detail was a loop in the letter V. I was sitting in Diana's guest room, the clock ticking past midnight when I opened the scanned PDF of a small business loan Jeffrey had taken out 4 months ago. $400,000. The signature at the bottom read, Valerie Caldwell. At first glance, it looked perfect. The slant was right. The pressure seemed consistent. But Jeffrey had forgotten one thing. I am a forensic auditor. I spent my life studying the tiny subconscious habits people leave behind in ink. I zoomed in 400%. There in the middle of my first name was a hesitation, a tiny microscopic tremor where the pen had lifted and reset. It wasn't my signature. It was a tracing. Jeffrey hadn't just moved money. He had committed a federal crime. He had forged my name to secure a loan that put our personal assets and my professional license on the line. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to leave me in a prison cell of debt while he sailed away with Tiffany. Just as the weight of that realization began to crush my chest, my phone buzzed with an incoming file from an unknown encrypted address. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet titled Actual Debt. And the sender. It was an old alias Tiffany had used in college. The kill shot didn't come from my research. It came from the mistress. Tiffany had realized that Jeffrey wasn't the wealthy mogul he pretended to be. She had seen the collection notices I'd started triggering. She realized she was hitched to a sinking ship. And like any opportunist, she was looking for a lifeboat. The file she sent contained Jeffrey's private ledger, the real one. It showed that he didn't have 1,800,000 hidden away. He had lost most of it in high-risk gambling and bad land deals. The money he moved for her was already gone, spent on interest payments for the forged loan. He was a hollow man, a facade of success built on a foundation of lies. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt a cold, hard resolve. Jeffrey thought he was the architect of a new life, but he'd only succeeded in building a cage, and I was the only one with the key. I didn't need to destroy him. I just had to show the world exactly what he had drawn. The office of Caldwell Financial Transitions was quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a controlled demolition. I sat behind my glass desk, the skyline of the city etched in steel and light behind me. I wasn't hiding, I was waiting. When Jeffrey burst through the double doors, he didn't look like the man who had stood atop the rooftop bar a week ago. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had the frantic, sweating look of a gambler who had just realized the house always wins. Tiffany wasn't with him. He was alone. "Valerie, you have to stop this," he choked out, leaning heavily on my desk. "The bank, they've called in the loans. All of them. They're saying there's an investigation into the small business credit line. They're talking about fraud. Val, federal fraud." I didn't invite him to sit. I didn't offer him water. I simply tapped a key on my laptop. A recording began to play. It was the audio from the hidden security camera in our old living room, captured the night he moved Tiffany in. "Valerie trusts me completely," Jeffrey's recorded voice bragged, dripping with a smugness that now sounded pathetic. "She's a glorified bookkeeper, Tiff. She sees the numbers I want her to see. She's her own worst enemy because she's too loyal to look closer. That's her weakness." I'd paused the recording. The silence that followed was deafening. "I wasn't too loyal to look closer, Jeffrey," I said, my voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. "I was just waiting for you to finish digging the hole. You see, this is the illusion of the empty wallet. You thought your power came from your name, your SUV, and your ability to stand at the head of a table. But you forgot that those things were built on my credit, my inheritance, and my labor. You mistook my support for your own strength." He sank into the chair, his head in his hands. "I'll lose everything. The firm, the reputation. I'll go to prison." "You already lost it," I replied. "The moment you forged my name, you ceased to be a businessman. You became a liability. And as a forensic auditor, my job is to remove liabilities from the balance sheet." I slid a final document across the desk. It wasn't a divorce settlement. It was a confession and a repayment agreement. "Sign this and I won't hand the secondary ledger Tiffany gave me to the district attorney today. You'll spend the next 20 years working as a junior project manager at a firm. I recommend paying back every cent you diverted from Madison's trust and the company accounts. You wanted a new life, Jeffrey. This is it. A life of honest work and absolute accountability." He looked at the pen as if it were a weapon. He realized there was no exit strategy, no offshore accounts to save him. He was a man who had spent his life pretending to be the architect, only to realize he had been living in a house of cards I had allowed him to occupy. He signed. His hand shook so much the ink feathered on the page. I took the paper, blew on it to dry the ink, and stood up. "You have 10 minutes to leave this building, Jeffrey. Don't look back. There's nothing left here for you to audit." 6 months later, the colonial house on Westover Drive has a new name on the mailbox, Madison's name. I visit her on Sundays and we drink coffee on the porch I built with my own savings. Jeffrey is working, truly working for the first time in his life. He calls Madison occasionally, but she's busy. She's a junior associate now, specializing in white-collar crime. She learned from the best. As for me, I sit in my office 40 floors above the city. I opened my old marriage file today, the one I've been using as a digital evidence locker. I stared at the years of red lines, the thousands of hours of invisible labor, and the millions of dollars I'd protected. Then I hit the delete key. The screen flickered white for a second, then went clear. No more red lines, no more project clarity, just a clean slate. My worth was never tied to his ledger. It was always my own. That night, for the first time in 30 years, I slept through until morning. No noise, no guilt, just the quiet peace of a balanced account. If you've ever been underestimated by someone you built up, type Soverini in the comments. Share this with one person who needs to remember their own.